You're a failure.
And that's okay. Hi, I'm Dan.
And I'm Alicia. And we're failures too.
We take a walk back through people's failures and relive the mistakes they made so we all can have more clarity in how to be a better human.
Welcome to the 2020 Perspective, where we make failure fun.
In our next story, our guest's biggest wish was to be crushed by an air conditioner.
Which would be cool, right?
So cool.
But really, our guest in this episode is now the head of marketing at the health tech company called Cedar. She wasn't crushed by an air conditioner, which is thanks to her tenacity in her graduate program. Even when faced with a monstrous exam, she knew to be her downfall.
And what's great about this story is that we're going to relive those cold sweat moments she experienced during her exam, crafting an extensive apology note in Excel, which is bananas.
Let's welcome to the podcast, Bethany Hale.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to tell you how badly I fail. It's amazing.
You're in the right place.
Let's hear it. Yeah,
So many failures. Yeah. I picked one in particular because I literally still have nightmares about it. And it haunts me at least once a year. I'll have one of those dreams that brings this all back. So it still feels, even though it was a long time ago, it still feels really close to the surface and relevant.
Okay,
So.
this sounds juicy.
Yeah, so this was a long time ago, but I was living in Chicago. I was a couple years out of college at that point, and I was really excited to be in a big city. I grew up in Michigan, so I had moved to Chicago, and I was doing PR, kind of corporate PR. So I was working at a law firm doing PR for them, and I kind of hit this point in my career where I started looking around, asking myself, like, am I feeling fulfilled? Mm-hmm. Am I feeling inspired? Am I going to do legal PR for the rest of my life?
It must have been
where is this going? Yeah. I mean, I definitely woke up every day and went into the office and liked who I worked with, but I just didn't feel like super inspired or fulfilled in my career. You know, it was okay and educational and it paid the bills, but I had been a journalism major in college and I just felt like I wanted to be a storyteller, but I also felt too young to have made this decision and that this is where the rest of my life was going to go. So it was a pretty standard quarter life crisis, I call it, where I just sat back and said, is this what's going to be the rest of my life? And like, where do I want it to go? And it feels like the clock is ticking, but I'm still young and I want adventure and I want travel and I want to meet new people and I want a career that's fun and that is enriching and all these things. So, you know, I just started having these ideas and feelings and then started talking to other people, my contemporaries, like, what are you doing? Are you feeling these same feelings? Is this what you want to do for the rest of your life? Like, where are you going? So I started having these conversations and I started to feel like I wanted to go back to school. So grad school started calling my name, like maybe I had more to learn. And if I picked the right program, I'd meet new people. I'd maybe try a new city or a new place. Maybe I'd get to travel. Like I'd be learning, like all these things that really sounded appealing.
This sounds so very familiar to myself personally, so I'm very intrigued. Yeah.
School felt like the right call for me, but then I started researching programs. Is it business school? I was a writer, so is it a master's in fine arts focused on creative writing? Like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And I start exploring. And I narrowed down to, I was really drawn to business school, and the people that I had talked to who had gotten MBAs in different programs, they were like, it was the best experience of my life. I met all these great people. I traveled the world. I got to, you know, really build my career and go in a new direction. I was pivoting, like all these things. So it sounded really appealing. And I started to narrow down on like, yeah, maybe I want to get an MBA, but where do I want to go in business? And I start looking at programs, and a few that really appealed to me had a focus on corporate social responsibility. And that sort of sang to me in certain ways where I'm like, okay, this feels mission oriented. It feels there is a connection to marketing and PR when you think about corporate social responsibility and like the impact you're having on a community, but you're talking about that and helping businesses do good things. Or you could be sort of a socially responsible entrepreneur and create opportunities for people in third world countries, or focus on microfinance, or, you know, any number of things. Give opportunities to women who, you know, otherwise wouldn't be able to create a business for themselves.
Sounds very compelling.
I was into it. This was
Yeah.
checking all the boxes for me, and this was sort of where I wanted to go with the program. But what was interesting to me, when I started to talk to my closest friends and family about it, I got a lot of hate. I don't know where it was coming from, but things like, oh, wow, you know, MBAs are really expensive. Like, you don't have any money. How are you going to pay for this? And you're a writer. Like, how are you going to take all these business classes and
very
finance
judgy.
and kind of judgy, I think, you know, having my best interest in mind in some ways, but also just like, you know, I think sometimes when people question your decision to try something totally new, and they feel a little bit threatened by that, and maybe it's themselves questioning their own, like, maybe I should do that too. Why don't I want to do that kind of thing? So I definitely got a little pushback, and for me, that pushback actually really motivated me. I was like, oh, you don't think I can pay for this? You don't think I can get into an MBA program? Like, I'm definitely getting into an MBA
I'll show
program.
them. I'll show
and
them.
I will do everything.
Juice to make it successful.
Yeah, completely. So it inspired me. I started studying for the GMAT. I took a finance prep course at a local community college because I knew that was going to be sort of a weak area for me, even from an application standpoint. And I started networking with all these people who had MBAs and like understanding what their experience was, and started talking to the different programs. And, you know, I went through the whole process, and it was really rigorous while I, you know, had my job as well. So writing the essays, studying for the exams, making sure I got all the ducks in a row and my letters of recommendation and all of that. And I only applied to one school. I was super, super focused, and I was like, I want to go to Columbia Business School. I want to live in New York. I want to have this international, cool city experience, and I'm going for it. And I got in.
Nice.
Hooray. So,
Right? That's great.
It's awesome.
so success, awesome. Not my fail yet, obviously.
It's coming.
Yeah, it's still coming, still coming. So I get to New York. I moved to New York. It was definitely a culture shock, even from Chicago. New York is gritty and frankly dirty and expensive, like 3 times the cost of housing in Chicago. And meanwhile, I had taken $130,000 of student loans. So think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was in a new city and I didn't know anybody. And I'm going to this program, but I'm super excited. And, you know, you meet people right away. And it was really everything that I was excited for, and started on this journey. And it was like sort of leading me in the direction that I hoped. However, it was also super overwhelming.
And you're doing this full time, right?
Yep, I signed up for the full-time 2-year program, but because of the amount of student loans that I had taken out, I was also planning to work part-time, and I got a job right away as a teaching assistant, and sort of, you know, did it like over the summer. I was bartending in New York. Like, I was doing all the things that I could to just like make as much money as possible to handle the loans. And frankly, there's expenses that are above and beyond what the loans will cover as well when you're living in New York. So had a lot going on, and it was very overwhelming. So classes start, and I realized that my application, you know, when I filled out my application to come to Columbia, being sort of a non-traditional student was helpful to my application because I didn't look like everybody else. I wasn't your typical investment banker or strategy consultant, you know, looking to sort of have a break between years in my investment banking career or whatever it was. I was really like a different profile. And I think that helped me get into the school. But once I was there and started, you know, taking the coursework, I realized really quickly that I was learning everything from scratch, Whereas a lot of my contemporaries in the program had come from finance or had come from consulting or had come from like corporate marketing jobs that were pretty traditional. And so, I had a steep learning curve. I'd never used Excel before and literally had no idea.
That's a doozy.
Yeah.
That's a doozy. When you actually have to go in and do things really quickly and you're trying to YouTube how to do things on Excel, that will slow you down.
The downside of trying something totally new is that, you might not get it, right, especially right away. So the interesting thing I started hearing a buzz, particularly around one class in particular, which was corporate finance. It's a bit of a legendary class at Columbia, but I think just across the MBA, framework of corporate finance being a really, really difficult course, super competitive. And Columbia was a competitive school to begin with. There were a lot of finance focused people in the school. And so corporate finance became this really tough course that was super competitive. We were graded on a curve and it moved really quickly. And our professor was a person who was a legend on Wall Street. So he was sort of like one of those people that had been on Wall Street for decades and then like transitioned into teaching, but he wasn't a professor by design, right? So he had a great connection on Wall Street and a ton of experience. But as we got into a few weeks of class, I realized like, I am not learning anything and I don't even understand what language they're speaking, right? Like And I was pretty open about asking the dumb questions in class. Like I asked this question. So are revenue and sales the same thing? So that was one of my questions in front of a class of people who most of them came from corporate banking. So are revenue and sales the same thing, right? So that was the level I was on.
What was the reaction?
I mean, no one outwardly laughed. But it was like, that was the kind of thing where I was asking the dumb questions. And in some cases it was, I would get my quick answer like, yep. When we say revenue, that means sales. It's the same thing, it's semantics. But, if that's my level, I'm definitely not in the right level for this class and moving forward with people who are working in this field of investment banking.
It sounds like another level of like Judgy McJudgerson here of you ask questions, you're in school to learn, and you're surrounded by, sure, a lot of A players and a professor who's, banging, but you kind of left to sink or swim on your own merits. It's like, that's not even school. It's kind of like here's a test and here's a whole bunch of hard stuff.
Yeah, but admittedly, I probably should have known revenue and sales. Like looking back, I probably should have opened Excel before I had gone to business school, and I probably should have known revenue and sales were the same thing. But I didn't.
Life lessons.
So
yeah, this is whatever.
Yeah,
Life
I didn't.
Live your life.
And I asked a lot of questions, but many times I wouldn't even understand the answers that were delivered back to me. So I would just end up realizing like I'm in trouble. Like 3-4 weeks in, I'm like, I'm in trouble and I'm not going to catch up. So I'm trying to read the book. I'm trying to learn Excel. I'm talking to tutors because they definitely provided resources for people like me, but it's a lot. And I had 5 other classes at the same time. So it was a beast of a situation, and I'm working part-time, right? So there's a lot going on in my life, and I realized like we get a few weeks in and I'm like already so far behind. There's like little chance of catching up. The other thing I should mention is that corporate finance is so competitive, and it comes down to one test at the end of the semester. So there's no pop quizzes, there's no check in on you and see how your learning is progressing. There's like one test. It's a case study where you read a scenario, and then there's 3 questions based on that case scenario. And you have to basically build an Excel model or series of models to give you answers that you have to show all your work. It's an open book test, so you can take all your notes from the whole semester and work your way through this test. And I won't forget to mention this, it was a 6-hour test. So
I'm
you
getting nervous.
arrive, yep. Yeah. So you arrive at 9 a.m. and you're done 6 hours later. So people are packing snacks. They have their lunches. You've got your, energy drink on tap, like all the things that you need to get through a 6 hour period without leaving a classroom.
So sketch to me kind of like the weeks leading up to this test. So you're seeing the writing on the wall. You're talking to the tutors. You're juggling a million things. I mean, what's your head at? Like, what are you feeling in this moment, in these weeks leading up to this big exam?
I mean, there is a growing sense of dread building in my mind, but I also had to focus on other classes as well. So I was able to sort of stamp it down. Like I would freak out for a couple hours a night, and then I would say, oh, I need to focus on my marketing or my accounting class or whatever number of other classes were going on at the same time, all of which had final exams the same week, right? So there was a lot going on in addition to corporate finance. So I would have, a freak out every day, but then I had to just turn my attention
I remember this.
to something else. Yeah.
You had the same thing?
I still have those, actually. I still have this. What do your freakouts look like? Mine typically are when I don't have enough time. I feel like I don't have enough time to do the work that I need to do. I usually cry. It's really one of the only times I actually cry.
I don't cry. I end up shutting down a little bit. Like I get very overwhelmed and like borderline panic attack. And then I have to just like take a run or, call a friend or just literally turn the page and try not to think about it for a minute. But for me, it manifested in like study, just read the book. Maybe something will stick, like trust the process. Like you're trying to learn, like, let's just get through this. But it was a sad state of affairs. It was rough.
I stress eat and or shut down as well and get super curt and really like close-lipped and like try and block out all the extraneous things. Like I also like compartmentalize all those feelings, all those stress, anxieties, and just say, as long as I do the things, my problems will disappear.
I had a bit of fronting going on too, because I didn't want to admit to my classmates just how bad the situation was. So as much as I knew that it was bad, I was sort of hiding the fact from everyone around me, other than my tutor, who was like, I don't even know where to start with you. Most of my, friends and colleagues had no idea how bad the situation was. So there was a bit of like shame spiral happening as well.
Do you think that they would have not responded or connected with it? Or do you think that they would have been like open and helpful looking back?
It depends on who. I think most people would have said, oh, it's not that bad. I'm sure you're exaggerating. I'm sure it's not that bad kind of thing. Because there was a lot of that sort of posturing, like, oh, I'm not going to be good enough. And then you're like acing everything, right? Like there was a lot of that going on too. So I definitely suffered in silence, and I will never forget the walk. So it's finals week. I'm walking on the cobblestone in the cold in the beautiful Columbia campus in the middle of New York City, and I'm walking and like crossing my fingers, hoping that an errant bicyclist will mow me down on the way to the exam so that I can go to the hospital and get out of this exam somehow. Like I was waiting for like an air conditioning unit from a building to fall on me. Like I was hoping for anything to get me out of this exam. But, I got to the exam room, and I see everyone sitting there like unpacking their lunches and their granola bars and their energy drinks. And I, did the same and sat down and opened my computer and got going.
Let's take a quick break. Do you want to bring the 2020 perspective insights to your team, community group, or company? This season, we're opening the door to talk with you about your failures and engage in a dialogue with the community that matters to you.
For this season only, we're running a special offer called the Failure to Findings Talk, where we can help you learn from failure and build a culture around being a successful failure.
reach out to us at hello@the2020perspective.com and let us know you're interested in the Failure to Findings talk. Again, that's hello@the2020perspective.com.
Let's fail out loud together. And now back to the failure.
Like I said, it was a case format, so you read what's going on in the scenario, and then there's 2 or 3 questions that you have to answer, but you're building these huge financial models to get to these answers. And I start to build my model. I think I kind of understand parts of it. I kind of get halfway through things, and I look up and I'm done. Like at a certain point, I'm done, and I look up and I realize only 45 minutes have passed.
You're brilliant. That's what it is.
Oh
You're
my
brilliant.
gosh.
And it's way too early to leave, right? Because like, it's just, like, that's just unacceptable. I had to save face a little bit. So I'm like, all right, so what am I going to do with the rest of the 5 hours and 15 minutes I have to sit in this classroom? So I'm like eating my granola bar and just like double checking my answers and trying to like see if anyone else is done and all those things. And I just decided, I'm so mortified by this whole situation. I feel like I need to write an apology letter to the faculty at Columbia for my just complete inability to learn anything like related to corporate finance.
Aww.
And so I used my Excel sheet to like write, and it wasn't like a short vignette because I had 5 hours, guys. So
Oh my gosh.
I wrote like an epic novella of apology of my story and why I was at Columbia and how meaningful this whole experience was to me. And I really tried my hardest, and here's all the things I would do differently next time. And like, if I fail this class, can you please help me find a time to make up the class and take it again so that I can still graduate on time with all of my friends and like all this stuff. It was like kind of a sob story, a major apology. And like, I wrote for a long time. And then finally, when people started to get up and leave at the normal time, I, quickly also made my exit after, hitting submit on my exam. So.
And you wrote this in Excel?
Yeah, it was in like, it was like, I formatted it, but yes, it was in an Excel model because that's what we were turning in. Yep.
So you probably wrote for like another hour or 2.
Or more. I can definitely write for 4 hours, no problem.
I mean, yeah, she's got the
This is
journalism.
why you're in marketing. Yeah, this makes more sense than corporate finance.
And it was a cry for help. Yeah.
I'm still like fully like dialed into like the apology note in Excel because
Yeah.
I've written like words or a sentence in Excel, but I've never like a fully fledged apology note like that. That's saying something like, look, you're really, really comfortable in the tool. You got this.
No, that is not the way you should use Excel. This probably even further clarified for them how bad the situation was. It was pretty rough.
So what was their reaction to the letter?
So once you submit the test, it's, the end of finals week. So everybody goes home. It's just like the normal holiday situation. And, you don't get a reaction or your final grades for a little bit. So I had to go home and like stew on this situation for a while. And, try to enjoy the holidays and try to plan for, I knew I failed. There was no question in my mind, but now it's like, okay, so am I going to have to give up another class, or can I take it over the summer? Like, what do I have to do to make this right? And then I got my grade, and, I had failed the exam, but I see on my transcript that I got a low pass. So at Columbia, you can get a high pass, a low pass, and then there's like basically fail. You're done, like whatever. But so I see that I got a low pass, and I was like, this is not correct, but I'm going to go in and check and talk to someone about it. So I met with the faculty, and I was like, I see I got a low pass here. That cannot be correct. And I talked to them about my letter and just the plea that I made. And I think there was some There was some other student complaints about the quality of the teaching of this class and the level of teaching that was available versus the level of skill of the students that were in this class.
So you weren't actually suffering alone. There were other people
Yeah.
who had that pain.
If only you had known then,
twist.
you know?
So they
Plot
gave me the
twist.
low pass, which frankly does not look good on a transcript. Like if you're getting a low pass, that means you were basically in the bottom 10% of the class, and like it's a pretty dire situation, but you still at least pass the class. So you don't have to retake it. So I was like, I will take this low pass and be grateful for it and say thank you and like never talk to you again, because like I never want to think about corporate finance again. But you know, so now I only have to think about it in my nightmares when I have dreams where I'm literally trying to figure out the weighted average cost of capital in an Excel spreadsheet.
I don't even know half the words you just said.
Exactly.
It's bringing back nightmares to me too. This is heavy. I can only imagine that feeling in the classroom when you looked up and you had it only been 45 minutes. I mean, I don't know about you, but like I think that I probably would have felt that like cold sweat kind of like wash over me. Like, what were you feeling before you decided to write the letter in that moment when you're like, how can I kill time? What were you feeling?
I was hot with embarrassment. I mean, I'm sure I was like blushing and cheeks red and just like, what am I going to do right now? And trying to figure out and scamper away. Cause I'm thinking like the people sitting behind me, can they see that I'm just done and like writing a letter right now? Like all of these things are going through my head. But, yeah, I was literally a hot mess in that situation. And that's why I was like, I just have to write the letter, because at least it'll give me something to pour this emotion into instead of just sitting here and looking at a blank computer screen.
I know. When I was in college, I was in marketing for business, and I took macro and micro economics. And when I took the third one, I literally had no idea what I was doing. I got the tutors. I read, like you were saying, Bethany, like before class, I would read ahead. So I kind of had an understanding of what was going on in class. I had a tutor, and it was almost like every concept was flipped in my brain. And so when I sat down to take the test, I would literally fail because I would answer the exact opposite of the right answer. It was like it didn't make sense. I think I ended up getting a D in the class, but I mean, I'm pretty sure they were probably happy to just, like you said, I'm never going to do economics. I don't ever want to do economics. So just like, let's just shoo you away and like move on to the juicy stuff that you can do well.
Well, I asked for a life experience and I got one.
Yeah.
I got the highs and I also got the lows, and it's one of those stories that I'll never forget from business school. I also traveled to the Middle East and saw Lebanon, and I also went to Asia, and like all these amazing experiences through my business school program. But one that will be in the top 3 memories is this failure of my corporate finance exam.
Like looking back, was there a different way to go through this? Like if you could like time portal your way back there, would you have done anything different? Because it sounded like you played all your cards.
I really tried. I'm sure. So the lessons that I learned, I think had I tried to do it again, I probably would have reached the same outcome. Like this for me was just like, I was not prepared to understand these concepts with the level of schedule that I had. And so could I have quit my part-time job to focus more on corporate finance? Probably. Would I have? No. So, like I think back about some of my decisions, and I don't know if there would be a different outcome necessarily, but what I learned is a lot. So, I appreciate now that I owned my failure, not just like years later in this conversation, but literally in the moment, I owned it. I was like, I fully failed. I'm failing right now. And I'm going to tell you about it. And I'm going to ask for help because I don't know what else to do, but tell you that I'm failing and ask you for help. And that's one of the reasons that I got the low pass, is because I was owning it and I asked for help. I would for sure do that sooner. I think a lot sooner, and have done a lot more practice exams and stuff like that to just figure out how bad the situation was earlier. But I think the other thing that it taught me was how important this student-teacher relationship is, and that education is really a two-way street. And I think about that as, you know, we're sitting in a pandemic and a lot of people are doing remote learning, which can be really difficult for people to track. And I have a 5-year-old daughter who is trying to do remote learning, and fine, she's in first grade education, but these are concepts like reading and writing and math that can be really difficult for a person to consume when they can barely understand how they're, you know, like how they're engaging with their teacher in a remote Zoom meeting, right? She doesn't even know how to work her mute button, much less use this tool to learn. So I'm really carefully watching her consumption of this remote learning and how she's embracing it or not, and trying to work with her teacher, because it's got to be hard to teach students remotely and like understand what they're taking in and what they're not. And so it's that whole relationship that I'm really highly attuned to now, because like, I mean, I think anyone in the class could have seen by the level of my questions in corporate finance that like I did not get it. And like, you know, I was asking for help along the way, but didn't get enough of it. So you're never going to be able to help every student in the perfect way, but like, at least you could be watching for those signs. It sounds
like
you're
earlier. Getting some empathy here too. Of
100%.
Like being in your daughter's shoes of like, wow, I remember when I had to learn Excel and I had no idea how it worked. And, you know, here's a 5-year-old on a Zoom, and it's kind of the same dealio.
Yeah. And also the people that I work with, you know, even at Cedar and, you know, at my company, I think about that as I'm coaching my team and thinking like, okay, is my concept clear? Is what I'm asking for clear? Am I helping enable them, or am I making their lives more confusing and more difficult? So I'm thinking about it in that way, because again, communication and educating people is a two-way conversation. So you've got to like, you can't just assume that by saying something that's the person on the other end of that message is picking it up. So there's a lot of empathy on the coaching side for me as well. And then I think the final thing that I would call out as a learning is really just like, I'm okay embracing my strengths now and not worrying as much about my weaknesses. Like, I'm never going to be a corporate finance star, totally cool with that. But let me focus on those things like storytelling, like marketing, like being creative and, you know, creating visuals and things like that are going to tell a brand story. Like, focus on those things. And, you know, the other thing I'll call out is I'm a decent negotiator. So, you know, if you think about this apology letter that I wrote, like at the end of the day, I was negotiating for myself. Like, please don't fail me and kick me out of school. And even though I technically failed the test, like fail doesn't have to be the final answer. So, you know, maybe take that lesson is, yep, I totally failed in the truest sense of the word, but I also negotiated my way out of that, which I'm kind of proud of. I'm not going to lie.
I was interested how you were talking about this feeling of shame that you experienced, and maybe if you could talk to us a little bit more about how you leverage your community, or how you could maybe like mitigate that feeling of shame back then, or learning that experience then, how you can do that now.
Yeah, and I really did feel this sense of if I let all my classmates know how bad the situation is, they will, you know, I'm in this room of overachievers and I'm basically calling out like, I am failing. And it felt really, really uncomfortable and not like something I wanted to highlight to anybody, because we were supposed to be this elite group of students who, you know, only 10% of us got into the program. And so it's that difficult to get in, and now I'm in and I'm failing. Like, that just feels so terrible. But I do think the only way to get past that is to talk about it, because as my story sort of illustrates, I wasn't the only one. in that boat. And you never know that until you actually take the first step in admitting that you're having an issue and telling the people closest to you. So it may be like any other thing that you're keeping a secret and you're feeling really ashamed about it. You're locking yourself in that sort of world of shame. And until you can let that secret out, you're going to be stuck there. So I think it is about just like this whole idea of owning your failure and talking about it and realizing, this whole podcast is the point, which is talk about your failure. Don't be locked in this world of shame about it, because we all fail and there's growth that comes from it. So, celebrate it.
Is this the first time you've talked about this with anyone?
Not anyone. This is the first time I'm talking about it openly, publicly to, everyone I know. But,
broadcasting it to the world.
It's the first time I'm podcasting about it. But at this point, also, time heals some of the sting that has occurred, and I do feel like there's a lot of lessons that have come out of it. So I'm excited to talk about it. It's good. Although I won't lie, there's a lot of anxiety happening in my chest region right now, just bringing back up these memories.
The Excel memories.
Yes, the dreams in Excel are crazy.
Well, you're a pro at it now. Like, you can write a whole apology note in Excel. I mean, there's not a lot of people who can claim that.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
I feel like everyone has a little story of like failing in school and failing at school. That's kind of like the point of school, right?
Is it the point of school to fail at it?
I think so. I mean, like, where else are you going to go fail at things and get better at stuff? It's like the fail house. That's what they should call it.
The fail house. I like that.
Yeah.
That's a nice little twist.
So one thing that jumped out at me from after re-listening to Bethany's story was the inevitability of her failure. So she basically knew a couple weeks in that this failure was coming down the line. And she tried everything. She threw everything at the wall to try and get through it. And also, she did have the odds stacked against her. And, credit to going to school, juggling a part-time job, completely shifting into a new city, all those changes, all that stuff. And then seeing this failure on the horizon just marching slowly towards you. So much so that even walking to the exam knowing that it's that like an air conditioner flying out of the sky is the best thing that could happen that's like horrifying, but it's such a different type of failure than we've talked about in some of our other episodes. I mean, it's some of the other ones it kind of got discovered, or there were red flags that were not ignored, but this is pretty like clearly a failure coming down the pipe.
Yeah, like walking into the exam knowing that you were going to fail. I mean, there's, like you said, there's nothing like this that we've talked about before. I kind of, hearing her feelings that she was experiencing when she talked about it, it actually brought me right back to a similar feeling that I had whenever I was in undergrad and I took economics. I had taken the first one and the second one, and this was the third one. And it was notorious for the professor was notorious for just like being really, really hard. And I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I got a tutor. I read before class. It was like my brain did not want to understand it, despite how much effort I put into it. And I, it was like when I went to the class or to the test and I would answer the questions thinking that I know this, I got it. It was like I answered everything opposite of what the right answer was, and I failed. And there's nothing like that feeling, that sweat, cold wash over you when you know that you have been defeated. And there's really nothing that you can do despite your efforts. You have lost. And then where do you go from there? And I think that it speaks volume to her character about how she sat and wrote that letter. And in a sense, in Excel, let's talk about that. But in a sense, she made that experience a success by utilizing her strengths. And I think that's what we have to do in life when we have these failures or we hit the wall, it's like the universe might be telling you something. This is not your jam. So don't try harder, pivot and go a different way.
I want to agree and disagree here. Like, in some cases, absolutely. Like, play to your strengths. Don't bang against the brick wall. Take the side passage. But I think there's something really compelling. I think that's why I think of it, school as the fail house. Is this is the place to really test your mettle and really fail big at something in a safe space. I think that's exactly the point. And as much as it sucks, I'd much rather get that feeling going to an exam than going to my boss who's about to fire me because I didn't do something right. Like, I'd rather go in a place where I could just retake the class or, whatever. So I think it's good because it gives you a measure of your resilience and a measure of your strength and fortitude, your tenacity to keep studying, to be vulnerable and find a tutor. I mean, like, that stuff is things you have to learn. And I don't think you'll learn it unless you're put into a situation where you have to learn it, like an exam that's going to crush you.
I mean, if you do feel like fail at everything, then you won't be allowed back into school. But I agree with you in the sense that, you do have to have those, it's almost failure with the safety net. I like what you said, like you fail a class. Well, if you want to stay in school or you fail a test, you have this opportunity to pull up your bootstraps and say, okay, what can I do to make sure I exhaust all my efforts to get to where I know I'm capable of?
Yeah.
And then, maybe if you keep doing that, then it's like, okay, this is not my subject. I shouldn't go into this field in my career. But, if it's part of the overarching curriculum,
and some blame, after doing Nina's interview, like some blame could be passed on to instructors if you're consistently failing and there's no way for you to learn. Like, there is a piece here that the instructors have to pay a little in.
Yeah, agreed.
As the learning nerd, it's not just the student who's the problem.
Yeah, let's blame everyone else.
I'm
blame those professors.
Yeah. Let's blame the professors. Let's blame the system. Yeah, let's smash the patriarchy.
Right.
Thanks to No BS Brass Band for the Bang & Show music. Check them out at nobsbrass.com. And subscribe on your favorite podcast player or follow us on Facebook to get the newest failures delivered right to your ears. And may your failures be spectacular.